Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. Today I've got a very special guest for all of you. With me in the hot seat, we've got Matt Daus, founder and chair of the transportation practice at the Windels Law Group. Matt, I'm very excited about this. Welcome to the hot seat.
It's good to be here. Trying to keep cool. I'm used to being in the hot seat, having worked at the government for so many years as TLC commissioner. It was hot. Couldn't get hotter than that. But
Yeah.
I'm ready for the ride.
Let's just heat that up. But before we heat it up, why don't you just take 30 seconds and tell us about the important work that you're doing through your law firm?
Sure, and thanks again for having me, Spencer. Your group and what you do is tremendous, and we kind of are in this similar space. We're one of the few firms, if really the only firm, that specializes in regulation in the transportation sector. After working for government for 20 years, I entered academia and went to this law firm, which has been around since the 1800s. It's called Windels Marx. We do work all over the country. We represented Thomas Edison and defended the patent to the light bulb. That's how old we are. It's a mid-sized firm.
Wow.
I started and founded the Transportation Practice Group, which is on a full-service platform. You know, the firm is full service. You do everything from labor to litigation, tax, corporate. Taking my regulatory expertise, having been commissioner of TLC for so many years, we kind of started representing taxis and limos, and we built on that. And for the last 14 and a half years, we've been representing all modes with pretty much all areas of law with a true understanding of goods, packages, and passenger delivery, anything from the bus industry, limos, taxis, and on a full service platform, Spencer, as you know, we do labor law, M&A, corporate. So we've been very involved in that. And at a high level, monitoring the trends, you know, as an academic now and a lawyer and someone who worked for the government representing the other side, I'm actually able to see things at a 10,000-foot level, see what's coming, looking at the trends. And a lot of those things are important in terms of guiding how you give legal advice and consulting advice to clients. So it's been a great run, and we're still in motion, and we're going to continue building on this wonderful, interesting practice that we have.
Well, that's lots to unpack. Thomas Edison, guitars, regulation. We're going to try to pack it in here. So let's jump right in, sir. So let's talk about regulation because it's certainly a very specific expertise of your firm. What are some of the like? Let's just, how would you describe the current regulatory environment? What are some of the trends that our audience would need to be aware of as they try to create value for their companies in the space?
Well, that's a good question, Spencer. You know, the regulatory landscape in passenger ground transportation in particular has changed a lot. You know, there's more on the horizon for goods and package delivery. I think, you know, the gig economy has fueled a lot of changes. You know, the creation of Uber and their disruption, and now we have delivery services and the logistics markets being upended by different competing modes. I think it's gotten more complicated. I mean, number one, unlike other countries around the world where they have licensing and transportation all under one agency's roof, and California is a great example, it's disjointed. You have states and localities regulating different things. My world in which I live, you know, you could go anywhere from the Atlanta Police Department issuing taxi licenses to consumer and business affairs issuing TNC licenses and taxi and limo licenses. Most of the regulations local, but since Uber and Lyft came on the scene, it went to the state level. You know, so it's really a maze of figuring out where to go and what licenses to get. But it also has created some opportunities, Spencer. You know, at the very beginning, the TNC laws were passed to kind of keep the taxi and the limo industry down. You know, but now there's been some loopholes and some deregulatory changes that have taken places in some states like Florida and Tennessee, for instance, where you're from. You know, it's easy to get a TNC license and to compete and do limo and taxi service without having to do much. You know, so there's been some deregulation.
Just pause you real quick for those of our audience that are not familiar with the acronym TNC. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so transportation network companies is the state licensing term given to companies like Uber and Lyft who created those laws, really at almost in every state of the union. And TNC laws allow for some self-regulation. higher licensing standards and different insurance models where they allow you to use your personal motor vehicle insurance instead of commercial insurance, which is more pricey, and the company takes responsibility. We've seen now that there are companies out there that when they approach starting a business or expanding a business or taking over another business, that they look at their licensing permits, because you need a license for the most part to operate a transportation company on the passenger side in pretty much every state in the US. So they look at the options, not just the taxes and the regulatory compliance issues, but what's the easiest path for me to do business? Because all of these different fiefdoms that have developed over the years involve years and years of people protecting their turf. Nashville's a great example, Spencer. I was an expert witness on behalf of the city of Nashville many years ago, and there was basically a lawsuit by the Institute for Justice, which just so happened to be funded by Uber, to try to create a path for them to operate in between limousines and taxis, because they had a minimum waiting time and a minimum fare rule in Nashville, for instance,
Mhm.
and that kind of separated the taxis from the limos. So so it made like a regulatory distinction, probably pushed forward by their lobbyists to create turf. So you had taxis and limos carving out their turf for decades, and then TNCs, Uber and Lyft, came onto the scene from Silicon Valley, carving out turf for themselves. So
Mhm.
the history of regulation, and when it comes to having a bus or a non-emergency medical transit vehicle or a taxi or a limo, if you're looking to provide some type of service in the U.S., you need to know how to navigate what license that you need to get, and how you need to maintain that license and keep it in good standing. And so there's a lot of new options out there for people. In Florida, it's a perfect example. The TNC law that was passed allows limousine companies to, basically operate without regulation. So things have swung back a little bit. It used to be very highly regulated, as you know, in the taxi side at the local level. And since the
Right.
market was disrupted 10 plus years ago, now it's become more complicated, but now there's also more opportunities for companies to explore different business models that jive with the licensing process.
No, and I love that you're kind of putting a spin on that. If you stick around long enough, these things kind of cycle out where, it's life threatening and then it actually becomes the actual strategic advantage at some point down the road. And
It's
so
true.
you never know how things are going to turn. But let's, speaking of opportunity, let's transition to kind of where our firms intersect a little bit on the M&A standpoint.
Mhm.
And so, appreciate the work that you guys do in this space. Tell us about, from your vantage point, what are you seeing in terms of M&A trends in the passenger side of things, given very challenging season through COVID coming out, all kinds of disruption and erratic type rates as part of that recovery. What are you seeing right now? What are you seeing driving M&A?
Well, right now, M&A is driven by, as you know, rate cuts and interest rates, and the overall big picture of what's going on in business. But I mean, I think the pandemic really redefined things in many ways. When folks were presented with the challenge of the first time of having absolutely nothing to do. Transportation companies, as you know, Spencer, like many of our businesses, but in particular them, they're operational. So the owners never really focus on succession planning and other things, or taking vacation, because there's always something going on. Those folks having a complete ground stop was a point in time where they didn't know what to do with themselves. But when the PPP came out and a lot of the relief, it forced them to tighten their belts, to shed unnecessary vehicles, to kind of maybe get rid of some of the employees who weren't performing as well. So I think that belt tightening, when we came out of the pandemic, led to a lot of M&A activity, especially on the asset side. Like, when things started ramping up, people had shed a lot of their assets and employees, and if they couldn't actually even handle, Spencer, the business coming back right away completely.
Mhm.
I don't think after the pandemic any of these companies could have handled a complete return to 100%. So some of the companies started, believe it or not, and a lot of the deals we were involved in were smaller companies just looking to buy a couple of buses, and they couldn't buy some buses on the open market, so they would
Right.
actually acquire a company to get their vehicles. So we've seen a little bit of that activity, which started during the end of the pandemic and coming out of it, come to it slowed down a little bit. The industry is not back to where it is, where it used to be. I mean, from 2023 to 24, we're seeing that the bigger companies are doing better. Most of the large operators are above 60%, 65% of their revenue, but the smaller companies aren't doing as well. The smaller ones are, below 48% or 40% of their operating revenue, and some of their revenues have also been flat year to year. But overall, the bigger limo companies and bus companies are doing better than the smaller companies, which still creates an M&A opportunity ultimately. If the the capital markets remain tight because of high interest rates, then we can expect more M&A activity. But it also is business travel and working from home impacts these industries too. And I think we're kind of stuck where we are. We're not back to where we were before. And I think that there could still be opportunities, but it could very well be more tied to people looking to decide what they do now, as they age and they start to. Many of these are family-owned businesses, and people are starting to think about the future. Because the pandemic caused a lot of people, Spencer, to think about their life. How busy they were, and how they finally had a pause to think about things, and they're starting to do some succession planning. And M&A is part of succession planning too. I mean, it's an option, right? So I'm not saying that there's going to be a trend of developing from that, but we need to keep an eye on the overall economy and business travel to figure out what's going to happen. But things have settled down a little bit. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be deals coming. There's just going to be less of them. There was a big flurry of activity coming out of the pandemic, and after people tried to right size their businesses, some people folded, some people went out. The bigger bought some mid-sized companies and so forth. And I still think you're going to see some strategic M&A going on, but it's going to not be as much in the coming months. But we'll see where it goes after the election.
Let me. You just went into the danger zone. We're going to come back to that here in a minute, as far as the election goes. But I think that's relevant. Let me talk about succession planning here for a minute, because I think a lot of people misunderstand even what it is, why you prep around that. And when we're doing conferences and we're educating about succession planning, really what we're trying to do is to create processes, and of course, the legal documents that allow you to have options, to transition ownership to a party of your choosing at a time of your choosing, hopefully. And but I'm interested, from your firm's vantage point, where do you see some missed opportunities here as it relates specifically to succession planning? What are people missing, and what could they do to better protect themselves?
Well, it's a great question, Spencer. I think from seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly, because our firm does it all, like your firm does in terms of seeding deals on all sides. We represent buyers, sellers of transportation companies, and also we'll do due diligence if there are attorneys on both sides already. And our strength is our due diligence. Are your permits in working order? Do you owe any taxes or have any liens? We do a lot of that work. And to answer that question, I think the best way to approach it is have your house in order. I'm sure it makes life a lot easier for you when someone comes to the table with proper documentation, a succession plan, and a plan for the future. The worst thing that could happen is that you don't have your organizations together, you fudge it a little bit. People think you have a greater reputation and the emperor has no clothes. And once you start digging into the deals fall apart often because you don't have your house in order. It gives you an advantage of being from a position of strength, that you have your corporate documents aligned, that you have succession planning and a strong management team, that you have all of your licenses in good standing. These are things that a lot of people did during the pandemic because they were forced to do it in order to apply for the COVID relief money. Now I recommend that all companies, big and small, whether you're planning to retire or not, to be ready for a sale, to buy or to sell your company, you need, especially if you're selling, you need to have your corporate documents in order. And we often recommend to companies that they do, irrespective if they're looking to sell, some type of like a mental health, a mental checkup, well, maybe a health checkup, is a better way to put it. Like you go to the doctor once a year and you want to make sure that, first of all, that you have all your ducks in order and that your company is sound and solid from a legal standpoint. Did you protect yourself from risk? Do you have enough corporations to shield yourself from lawsuits? Is your IP protected in a separate corporate entity? You add value to your company by having your legal act together, so to speak, and your
Yeah.
operational act together. And succession planning is a part of that because, like anything else, when you start to prepare a will or plan for new management or your family members to take over your company, you need to start doing belt tightening and figuring out where all your assets are. How are you structured? Is it structured the right way? Are you mitigating tax risks and liability risks? These are things that are important for both attorneys, consultants, and accountants and CPAs to be very closely tied to this industry. And unfortunately, the bigger companies are more sophisticated, but most of the companies in this industry are small mom and pop shops, especially in the limo industry, for instance. And those folks don't spend time and money and resources on lawyers, and it's a big mistake. They end up doing deals on paper, M&A without attorneys. No good can come from that. I mean, something as important as buying and selling a company or planning for the future for your family, you can't do it on your own. AI is not going to take that over. You can't, I wouldn't recommend people doing living trusts and wills and estates on their own. You need a qualified professional, just as you wouldn't, have AI and characters operating on you without checking their credentials. You want a good surgeon, you want a good doctor. Same thing goes for, consulting professionals like yourself, accountants and lawyers. You need them. You don't need them for everything, but for something like this, you need them, and you should get your house in order. There's no downside that comes from that. The worst that can happen is you spend some time soul searching and making your company better operationally, and then you don't have to scramble at the last minute if an opportunity comes up where you're at a conference and someone's sitting across the table and they're interested in buying you and
Yeah.
buying your company. Be
I
ready.
love the I love that there's no downside to the work. 100% agree on that. So you mentioned AI. Now I did a little research on you. You got you mentioned the academia, but I believe you're a part of a transportation tech element at the academia level. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yes, I am transportation technology chair at the City University of New York's Transportation Research Center, which is a USDOT funded center in New York, where we do work in New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico, and we do studies around the country. So it's really given me the opportunity, Spencer, as an academic now, as well as a lawyer and former government official, to see what's coming next. Because a lot of times, the academics are advising government, and people that I teach, students that I teach at my university, they go on to become the people that make policy. So it's enabled me to be 2 or 3 steps ahead on trends, whether it's driverless cars or flying taxis. I mean, I remember the folks that I go to conferences with and at the Transportation Research Board that I collaborate, my colleagues. I was learning about these things before they hit the news. So it helps me get that big picture. So I still do it for that reason, and I also run the Regulators Association in my spare time as well. And
In your spare time, right?
that's a good thing to do because we want to train and educate the people that are taxi and TNC commissioners around the country, so they understand, what needs to be done, and that honestly helps with my clients as well because I know all these people. I know the new people. I know the people that retired. I've been around so long that it's not just about the regulations. It's having good relationships with the people that issue the licenses and who make policy that affect the transportation industry. And it's highly regulated, as you know, Spencer. You can't do anything in most industries without dealing with the government. One, especially on an M&A deal, that there's issues that have to be dealt with the government. I've seen deals fall apart because they didn't know that their licenses were suspended, or they had unpaid fines. There's a lot of crazy stuff that can go on, including the ownership. Sometimes these agencies have people on file as being the registered people to do business, and they've left the company. And I've had situations where deals have become complicated because there's not somebody of record that can actually transact business and make the ownership change once you've bought the company. Believe it or not, that happened in the bus and the limo industry to me before
Well,
with some of our clients, and it could be a bit of a mess. So it's important to know the people, because if you don't know the people in the government and have a relationship with them, they just won't return phone calls, and they don't really care about one company buying another. They don't care as much about that. That's not part of their job. What their job is to do is to process the paperwork. Who's owning what? Who's filing with us? So they don't really care if there's a $50 million deal that's going to go south. All they care about is doing their job and dotting their I's and crossing their T's. So being able to explain that to them and talk to them and have credibility with them, that's why people hire us too, Spencer. We can have
yeah.
those conversations as opposed to somebody calling like a hotline and nobody's answering the phone, and you're never just going to get it done on your own. So unfortunately, government is still a little bit stuck and bureaucratic, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. So we try to lend a helping hand in those situations.
So of the emerging technologies that you kind of teased a moment ago, what is one that you're particularly excited about?
Well, I am excited about driverless vehicles. I do believe that they're not going to take over the universe, but I think that they're going to be a player. Like I think you see it already in Arizona. They are Waymos are picking up vehicles, picking up passengers as we speak using an app, just like Uber. I don't think it's going to proliferate so quickly that it takes everything over at once. I think it's going to be a service for many years to come in certain states and cities where it's one of many modes that you can choose from. I mean, let's face it, non-emergency medical transportation work requires trained people, and from a liability standpoint, they need to be in the vehicle. Limousine drivers, I'm not going to hire a limo without a driver because I want that person who's going to take the luggage, that they're going to greet you and provide that customer service that you need. So I don't think it's going to disrupt the industry to the point where companies are going to go out of business here and there. It's going to make a dent, I think, in certain cities and states, but it's going to be one of many modes. I don't think it's going to take over the world anytime soon, but it's there and it's real and it's working and it's safe. Despite the reports that you hear, I've driven in these vehicles before. I know these companies. Some are more advanced than others, but that's an exciting thing. But urban air mobility is actually something which people are overlooking. It's
Mhm.
real. There are flying taxis. We have clients in the space too. The helicopters are going to be turned into uh, aircraft that have four noiseless rotors that what we call eVTOLs, electric vehicles that uh, you know that lift off vertical takeoff and landing. So they're going to operate like helicopters, be silent, which basically will silence hopefully the critics and the community boards and the neighbors that complain about the helicopter noise. And
Right.
the use case is going to be on emergency medical transportation initially, and high end travelers. But I believe that the airways and the space for there to be taking off and will allow this mode, I think, to go faster than the driverless cars. I think you're going to see a lot of these cities start doing this more and more often once the vehicles are approved by the FAA and the government. And I think you're going to see that mode take off very quickly and probably scale a little bit more faster than the driverless cars. So I'd keep an eye on that.
Hmm.
uh, Ground transportation, we're caught in a slog. We need to do better at making our businesses better, whether it's trucking or buses, and or other passenger transportation. Some of these industries, especially the school bus industry, where I know you do a lot of work, Spencer, they're kind of stuck in the Stone Ages. We have driverless cars and flying taxis, but we can't get air conditioning in some school buses, unfortunately. So, I mean, we have a lot to do on the ground transportation side because we need to keep up with this innovation because it's gonna provide some type of level of competition. People are not going to be taking jitneys and buses to the Hamptons if they can get an affordable helicopter ride that gets you there in 20 minutes. Right now,
Yeah.
the price point is not there, but it could be, especially if the government subsidizes it. So we'll see. We'll see how it
Yeah.
goes.
No, I love that. Well, I've got one final question for you. We
Mhm.
were cutting up as we were joining, getting this podcast started here. We're both musicians. I'm curious, what are three bands that had significant influence on you as a guitar player?
Great question. Well, and this is something that I've thought about many years. And the clear front runner is Eddie Van Halen. Now that he's gone, and may he rest in peace. I mean, he really was a trailblazer. Him, Les Paul, okay, who I actually met. I met Eddie Van Halen once. I was backstage with Les Paul, the inventor of the Les Paul guitar. One of the greatest things I've ever seen is Eddie Van Halen performing with Les Paul on stage once.
Wow.
And of course, I'm a big Led Zeppelin fan, but I'm into classic rock. I grew up on it. It's my favorite stuff. As you know, Spencer, I'm a speed guitarist. I was classically trained on piano, migrated to guitar because it was cooler in high school, and I play both, but guitar is my passion in terms of playing live with bands. I actually played in Nashville at a bar once a few times ago, about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So I actually play on the road at these conferences and stuff. But I've had bands since I'm in high school, and I put Eddie Van Halen up there at the top. He was really the guy who innovated the finger tapping, the sound. And believe me, it's hard for me to pick one guitarist, as I'm sure you have problems picking your favorite influences. But over time, and especially since he passed away, I realized that he was really the GOAT.
Well,
Greatest of all time.
I love those insights, and certainly appreciate the influence that you have on our industry. You're doing great things. Keep up the great work, and we'll see you next time.